So thank you so much, Dr. Saline, for being with us today. She's going to offer solutions for improving organization.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. We appreciate it in every way. For improving our teens' organization, planning, and persistence. We're so glad to have you as an expert speaker. Let me introduce her. Dr. Sharon Saline is a clinical psychologist and the author of a new book, which I can't recommend highly enough, called What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, Working Together to Empower Kids for Success in School and in Life. It's available on Amazon and in bookstores. Dr. Saline specializes in working with children, with teens, and with families living with ADHD, with learning disabilities and mental health connections, and especially in guiding families toward effective communication and closer connections. She's a graduate of Brown University and received her doctorate in psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology. You can find much more on her website, drsharonsaline.com, or on her Facebook page, facebook.com, Dr. Sharon Saline, or on Twitter, twitter.com, Dr. Sharon Saline. So take advantage of all the insights that she offers. Let me thank our webinar sponsor today. We are always grateful to our sponsors. They help us make these webinars absolutely free. The sponsor today is NEBA Health. NEBA Health offers a brains booster supplement packed with really great tasting and optimal ratios of omega-3s designed to support brain health in kids and adults. Happy, healthy brains, as I say, and no prescription required. So please visit NEBA Health, N-E-B-A Health, H-E-A-L-T-H.com to learn more. Thank you, NEBA.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk about how to help your teens become more organized, motivated, and to be able to follow through more successfully. We're going to start by talking about what my view of executive function fixes are. So executive function fixes address psychology and behavior for successful change together. There's, a psychology of negative thinking that pervades ADHD teens. There's shame, there's inner put down, even sometimes self-hatred. All teens are grappling with two major issues: who am I and where do I fit in? And I would ask you today to reflect for a minute or two on how these questions play out for your teen, and how do you think having ADHD affects them? I believe that including teens in all goal-setting planning programs geared to help them is essential. These kids, from my experience and from the many interviews I did for my book, need to have a buy-in for any programs to work. They have ideas about how their brains work and what works for them. And when you go with this idea, when you go with their conceptions and work on it together, these programs are more effective. Teens with ADHD have told me that they generally believe there's no such thing as positive feedback. It all feels kind of negative to them. So we want to keep encouragement in place to counter those critical negative voices in their heads. That, to me, is what executive functioning fixes are based on, and that's our foundation. So what are some five common mistakes that people make with ADHD teens, parents, and for those of you who might be educators or therapists, and how do you avoid them? So this foundation that I'm talking about comes from my 5 C's approach. So in this work, you become your child's ally, not his or her adversary, by understanding what it's like living with ADHD and perhaps a learning disability, and what motivates and discourages it. So the first thing that kids have told me repeatedly that helps them is when parents or adults manage their feelings first and then help the child. Because when you're getting upset, they become more agitated. So what the solution is for you to start to notice when you're getting off track and to try to bring yourself back by taking some deep breaths and causing a pause in the action. You want to act like your GPS. Reroute. The next mistake is not really accepting kids where they are or understanding their experience as a young person living with ADHD. So you want to meet these kids where they are, not where you think they should be or where you expect them to be. You want to accept yourself and your foibles and challenges as a parent, and model for them that we all have warts and we do things anyway. It's easier to accept your child or your teen. I will refer to your teen as your child and interchangeably here because they are your children. It's easier to accept them and their current challenges when you can actually accept yourself and model that we all have strengths and we all have challenges. Kids with ADHD, all kids, I believe, want to do well if they can. And if they're not, it's because they're not able to access the resources they need to do so. So we want to hold on to the possibility that your child will be able to change while you do everything possible to support them in making this happen. Kids with ADHD, teens in particular, have normal executive functioning delays that come naturally with having ADHD, which means the process of change takes longer and requires more patience and longer supports than you might think. The third mistake is not fully including kids in the solutions that you're creating for them. So that means collaborating, working together with your child to find solutions to challenges instead of imposing your rules on them. Of course, you get to have the last say, you're the parent, but you start any sort of planning from a we attitude instead of a you attitude. This helps them feel like you're really with them in the process. The goal, of course, is not being perfect. Consistency is not about getting it right all the time. What kids want is for parents to stay steady. They don't expect perfection, but you have to have clear messages and similar consequences for the same behavior as often as possible. A high five or a pat on the shoulder with a short thanks conveys two important messages. You notice their efforts and you're pleased with them. Kids with ADHD told me it's very confusing when the consequences change, when the directions or the expectations change. So really trying to stay steady is helpful. And the last mistake is not noticing the efforts that they're doing to make changes or the small successes that they have in accomplishing them. So you actively counteract the dominant negative messages that they hear daily into positive ones. Studies have found that a ratio of 3-to-1 positive events to negative ones makes a big difference in promoting behavioral changes and can-do attitudes. So with this 5C foundation that relies on strength-based thinking and attentive awareness, you become able to really launch your child into those executive functionings that they need. So for example, if your 13-year-old daughter is racing around on Sunday night in a panic because she forgot to do her math project that's due Monday, she's showing you things. You're aware of these things. You're paying attention to what she's showing you, not necessarily to what she's saying or the crisis or the emotional activation. What you're noticing is that she is disorganized, that she was not able to keep track of her assignments and unable to remember them. And so she's scared and she's worried and she's overwhelmed. And instead of angrily saying, how many times have I told you that you need to do a better job of your homework before the 11th hour? You respond empathically. And you say something like, I see how worried and overwhelmed you are about your math. Let's slow everything down and figure out what would be helpful. You'll get through this and I'll help in whatever way I can. So getting mad doesn't help either of you. Overloaded and need your support. The next day, when things are calmer, you can brainstorm a different approach to weekend homework. So here's what some of the kids told me about their experiences. I feel like when people hear the word disorder, it makes them feel like they're not equal to people, or like they're different from others, or you're sick and you're not. Your brain's just different. Disability, I don't like that word either. When I hear the word disability, I think you have an inability to do things, which isn't true. No matter what you have, no matter who you are, you can do things. Layla, age 15. Alex, age 13, told me, I sit there for 15 minutes and not have a single thing on my paper because I'm thinking. And when the teacher says just write something, I can't get more than 3 words out. It's bad. Sloan revealed, every day I can never catch up. The file comes in my head, but then paper goes everywhere, and then you have to look through everything to find one thing. All this time, more files are coming in with more paper that goes everywhere. So let's talk for a minute about the biology of the teen brain with ADHD to help us understand what's happening organically that's going on for kids that's reflected in the comments you just heard. So the human brain weighs approximately 3 pounds. It has over 100 billion neurons. It develops from the bottom up and the inside out. The size of the brain is about 2 fists together. It reaches its full size and volume by age 10. The brain is an electrical system in which chemicals regulate the communication of messages from one neuron to another. There are 3 centers: the physiological center, which is sometimes called the reptilian brain, which is in the back; the emotion center, which is the mammalian brain, which is more in the middle of the brain; and the thinking brain, which is often called the human brain, which is right here behind my hand in the frontal lobes. I actually call this the oy vey section of the brain because as parents, we often say oy vey, things that our kids are doing, whether they have ADHD or not. So the frontal lobes, which are located here in the thinking part of the brain, figure out what's worth paying attention to and worth doing. In kids with ADHD and who naturally have executive functioning challenges, the parents are the frontal lobes for much longer than in neurotypical kids. The frontal lobes develop until the age of 25 in neurotypical brains and about behind for kids with ADHD. In puberty, here's where it's relevant for our conversation today. The size and quantity of the neural networks all over the brain dramatically increase, especially in the frontal lobes and in the back of the brain cerebellum. And this proliferation of neural brain cells is followed by a period of pruning of networks so that the system can operate as efficiently as it can. And it's a use it or lose it, or as some people like to say, improve it model. The brain starts to specialize. Now, the 2 major neurotransmitters that are associated with ADHD systems are dopamine and norepinephrine. And they're not fully formed at birth, and they're slower to develop than the other pathways. Dopamine highlights important stimuli and signals possible rewards, creates conditions under which sensations are recognized as pleasurable. And it enhances the level of interest a person attaches to something. People who release dopamine at a lower rate, like those people with ADHD, can find it more difficult to work up excitement about something they don't naturally find appealing. Norepinephrine, associated with sleep and alertness in the cerebellum, is reduced in ADHD brains, and it can be associated with inattention, drowsiness, and sleep. Medications for ADHD don't create neurotransmitters, but they do facilitate their release and delay in those critically important networks. So how does this affect how teens make decisions? So teens need practical strategies for making decisions in the moment, not just summaries about the behavior choices to avoid. And the area of the brain that is in those and monitor behavior to them. And it's slower in teens with ADHD. And so ADHD teens struggle with balancing risks and possible rewards with the daily demands of their lives, whether it's choosing French fries or carrots at lunch, having a beer at a party, or driving before you're legally allowed. Just as the synapses in the brain, which are the space between the cells in the brain, are enhanced with exposure to facts and a memorization task, in teen brains, when there's repeated exposure to a substance, it's also a learned behavior. It doesn't occur in the part of the brain that we use for memorizing math facts. It occurs in the reward centers of the brain, those involving dopamine. So when there's more use in those centers of substances, it can create a stronger circuit and more cravings. And dopamine neurons in adolescents are more active than they are in teens. So teens with ADHD have lower amounts of dopamine and slower pathways have an increased susceptibility to using substances. And they just don't have the frontal lobe development to inhibit them, those executive functioning skills we're going to talk. So why do executive functioning skills matter? So executive functioning skills are the directive capacities of the brain right in these frontal lobes behind my hand, and they unfold developmentally as them, but not in a linear fashion. In kids with ADHD, this happens more slowly because of up to a 3-year lag in brain maturity. That's why they usually have challenges such as procrastination, disorganization, forgetfulness, impulsivity, and inattentiveness. Often what occurs to some kids to do without thinking can be harder for ADHD. The use of certain thinking skills to choose and achieve goals or create solutions to problems is still emerging and takes extra practice, whether that's planning or time management or understanding the ways that they affect other people when they're around them socially. Executive functions guide behavior. When we think about how you can, control yourself, what we call response inhibition, whether it's emotionally or verbally, whether it's how you start or don't start tasks, whether you're flexible and you can shift from one situation to another, whether you can stick with a goal to achieve it. So the more that we understand ourselves, which is called metacognition, the more that we are able to help develop these kinds of skills. And metacognition, along with judgment, is the last executive functioning skill to develop, in the mid-20s or late 20s for those kids with ADHD. So we have to give our teens some slack in terms of their perhaps limited capacity to understand themselves and what their challenges are. The more severe your executive functioning challenges are as a person with ADHD, the higher the likelihood you have of having a learning disability. So here's my guide to executive functioning skills. Hot skills are the ones that we consciously use in our everyday life, and they tend to be related to behavior. Cool skills are more unconscious. So let's talk for a minute about scaffolding, because for me, in addition to that 5Ds foundation, scaffolding is the key to developing executive functioning skills and making them stick. So scaffolding is not about making excuses for yourself or for your teen. It's about facilitating learning and making adjustments for executive functioning weaknesses. These are things that you probably do, and these are things that your child needs to learn how to do. So what we want to do is help our children do what they're already doing and reach a little bit beyond that. That's the goal right now with building executive functions. If you set your expectations too high and your teens fail, then they're not going to feel motivated to try again. So we want to reach to what they can do, go to what they can do, and reach just a little bit beyond that. So we want to kind of set things in motion so that they start to feel a sense of accomplishment, that you notice their efforts, that they feel that positivity. That will help their reward system, that dopamine that I was just talking about, continue to motivate them. So executive functioning skills have to be taught and laid out clearly. I believe that you need to do more of what works while slowly focusing on one area of improvement at a time. Really, if you think about yourself, how many things at a time can you change? One. I know I can only change one thing at a time. And that's true for kids too. So we want to basically model adaptation and flexibility. Now, will your teen push back? Absolutely. That's part of their job, being a teen. And what I want you to do when your teen pushes back, because there's a difference between pushing back and trying to make things work for them and how their brain thinks. And you probably know the difference. When your teen is pushing back, you need to put on your Teflon suit. Keep your sense of humor. Teens are interested in the process of problem solving, not just the solution. And if you're very solution focused and you're not including them in the process of problem solving, then you're not going to get the results you want. So negotiating for power is what they do. They're trying to forge their identity, and the way they do this is with testing you. You want to tolerate some discomfort in letting them try things on their own, perhaps succeed or not, and be willing to work with you or the teacher when these stumbles lead to lessons. Do we want our children to fall flat on their bottom? No, but stumbling is how they're going to learn. When I spoke with Jared, who's 18, he said to me, when I was younger in 9th grade, I didn't want help. I wanted to deal with things on my own. I was a cocky kid. But now I know that even though you're independent, you need help sometimes. You can't always do it alone. And so the part of the challenge for you, the dance, is between that cockiness that your child might be showing you and also their underlying, kind of belief that they actually do need some help and your knowledge that they need help. The question is when and how much. So let's get started on executive functioning fixes for school. So because I believe in the 5 C's, the cornerstone of the C's is about collaboration. And that means working with your child to get their buy-in and setting up a program that you then check back on each week at a set period of time. So how you start is you set aside 30 to 45 minutes on a weekend after a meal when there's nothing to do afterwards. And you might need more than one meeting to cover the material, and that's okay. So the first question you want to ask them is, what would they like to see continued from their success from last year? What was 1 or 2 things that went well that they want to continue? And what would they like to change? And share your observations and write everything down. Again, remember that you can only pick 1, maybe 2 things because we don't want to overwhelm them. You get to have the final say about what those things are, but let's get their buy-in. Maybe it's baseline grades. Maybe you decide that everything has to be 80 or above, and they agree. Let them make some suggestions first, then offer what you think, because they actually will follow the things that matter to them. With your input, you'll forge a solid path. Later, when this one thing that you've picked is going well, thing from the list that you already have. You want to create a homework plan. Where is the homework going to occur? When is it going to occur? For how long? What's the order of work that your child likes to do? Do they like to start with something hard and have a sense of accomplishment when that's finished, and then move on to something medium and then say this easy thing for last? Or do they prefer the reverse? Start with something easy, get that over with, and then tackle the hard thing. For those kids who take medication, this is an issue that you have to discuss with them, because once their medication, their long-acting medication, leaves their body, it's going to be more challenging for them perhaps to do the harder. So for them, maybe doing the harder thing would be good to start with. You also want to put in your homework plan specific breaks and times for study. So talk to your child. How long do you think you can work before you need a break? And then decide how long that break's going to be, how you're going to notify him that the break is done and get back to the work, and how what she's able to do during that break. So the break has to be incentive-based, something they like to do. The break is not a time to do the dishes. The break is a time to maybe, if you want, check your phone or go to the bathroom or get a snack or do some jumping jacks, whatever would be fun for your child. You want to identify the things that your child likes to do and make a list of these. These are your incentives/rewards. So when the have to is finished, they can do the can do. Okay? Get everything down, because in the midst of these conversations, there can be emotion. You may not remember. You live a busy life. Write it down so you can refer back to it. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about is how to get started, how to motivate your child. And interest fosters motivation. So when a task is fundamentally unrewarding, homework or cleaning the litter box, no one feels excited to do it. So with the lower amounts of dopamine in their brains, it takes your teen longer than their non-ADHD peers just to get moving. So extrinsic motivation refers to an outside reward that depends on achieving the goal. You turn in your permission form by driver's ed for Tuesday, or you can't take the class. Intrinsic motivation means striving towards a goal for personal satisfaction or accomplishment. You attempt to break your record on a favorite computer game. When a child or teen with ADHD can't see any immediate satisfaction from a task or grasp any long-term benefit, especially tough for their now, not now brains, they will struggle with it. They usually need an external reward or incentive to encourage them until the satisfaction of doing it, an internal reward kicks in. And that may not happen until kids are 6, 17, or 18 years old or later. The because I said so intimidation that you may have grown up with, or in my generation, may have gotten the job done, but it doesn't build lasting skills. And the goal that we're talking about here is building lasting skills. Incentives are not bribes. They're more effective than punishment because punishment doesn't teach motivational skills. So as I said earlier, in order to create meaningful incentives, you want to create a list of things that interest your child or that you could do with your child. Most of the time incentives fail because parents don't collaborate with their kids about what they would be. And so when kids are involved in choosing the incentives, that helps with their buy-in. And no activity is too unimportant to consider, including time with you as an incentive. So motivation is composed of initiation, getting started on something without direction, and procrastination, which is the opposite of initiation, is related to the size of a task. I've always as an equation: overwhelm plus dislike equals avoidance. Time management, doing things on time, correctly estimating how long something will take. You want to teach time estimation by pointing out when something starts and when it's finished, and use backwards design, which is planning in reverse for where you want to be in the future. To facilitate sustained attention, you want to manage, the resisting, you want to help them resist, their distractions. So set those timed work periods with timed breaks. And to foster goal-oriented persistence, set a goal that you agree on together. Stay focused on it and help them return to the task after an interruption. This is very hard for kids with ADHD, and they will need some assistance from you in getting back to what they were doing. And they might need some help, with the transition as well. So let's talk a little bit about organization and planning. When kids with ADHD aren't organized or able to plan, they haven't been able to create or maintain a system that works for them. This is where scaffolding, collaboration, and consistency come in. Their skills doesn't match the demands they're facing. So for planning, managing their stuff at home or at school, we want to think about that comment from that girl earlier about overwhelm, about the files continuing to come in and the paper going everywhere. So there's really no way around making lists, stuff done. And, your job is to help identify the steps in that list and perhaps use Post-its to sort of move them along or cue them. Make a weekly time to go through and empty your teen's backpack and help reorganize it if that's an issue for them. Make a list for cleaning their room and refer to the list rather than telling them the steps on the list. And referring to the list helps improve working memory and sequencing for them. They have to follow through, not you. Find out, ask them what organization strategies have worked for them and haven't worked for them. What kind of calendar, if any, are they willing to use? Have they used in the past? Do they like a planner? Do they want to use something? Do they like a tablet, Post-it notes, writing on the back of their hand? So we want to use something called a self-smart system. This is something that I created with a lot of my clients and have spoken about, trained other parents to do. And so what that means is we're identifying what kinds of organizational systems make sense to teens and helping them use those systems. And those systems don't work, trying something else. So some teens really like color-coded folders for their different classes. Some like one big binder with sections. Some like to take pictures of assignments, even if the assignments are online, with their phone, so that they can be cued. Remember what those are. Some kids take pictures of their completed homework and let it to their teacher if they have trouble turning it in, just to make sure that it gets there. You want to really work with them on what has helped and what hasn't helped in the past, and what things you can try. You want to teach struggling skills directly using technology to help them keep a calendar. This is a great way for kids to set alerts. They love technology, and it's built to do these things. You want to help them organize a locker or a room, and how to set reminders, or how to plan to be on time. Use the technology as an aid. They're happy with it, and God knows it will save you worry and strife in the future. Your teen has a natural desire for mastery and control. And so you want to work with that using technology or other ideas, written schedules, a big whiteboard in the center of the kitchen, to give them appropriate levels of choice and autonomy and follow through. Make sure the chunks of the things you're asking them to do are small enough that they can be accomplished. Procrastination comes from a task being too big. It's too big, it feels daunting. Break it down. If it's still not able to be accomplished, break it down more. There's no task too small. Keep the tasks brief and practice the difficult ones in small steps. Don't expect your teen to absorb executive functioning skills through observation or miracle osmosis. You have to teach it directly. Now, improving follow-through. So I'm going to teach you the rule of three. And the rule of three is when you give an instruction to a teen with ADHD or a child, you need to, one, get their eye contact, your eyes on my eyes. Two, say what your instruction is. And three, have them repeat it back to you. Now, I know that your teen will probably roll your eyes or tell you, ugh, whatever. It doesn't matter. Make sure they repeat it back to you, because this is how you're going to build the skill. When they look at you, when they listen to what you're saying and they have to repeat it back to you, the instruction is more likely to be encoded in their working memory and transferred to short-term memory than if you just say it over your shoulder as you're walking out the door. So ignore their negativity. Refer back to your mutually agreed upon plan for success, and meet weekly, every week, to review how things are going, what might need to be changed, and regroup if necessary. Remember to praise your child for little things and more praise. They're working hard to do this for you. You know, they spend all day at school trying to hold it together, and now they're home and they have to keep in, pay attention more. Their brains are tired. Their energy is tired. So we have to help nudge them along with positivity. So work together. Your teen will develop the motivation, organization, and persistence you both want to see. You try things, you evaluate, and you regroup as you go along together. Your teen will feel more capable, and you will see the development of the resiliency and independence that you want to nurture.
Great, Sharon, thank you so much. That was fascinating. We have lots of questions here. Because collaboration is is such a key part of what you're talking about, I thought we could go back to that. There are a couple of more than a few people who say that that's one of their big challenges. So, example from Abigail, our son, age 14, absolutely refuses to discuss homework with us and plan to do it. How do we put a plan in place with him without it becoming a fight? Or Shelley, who says, my daughter just resists our ideas just because they're my ideas. How do I work with her despite this challenge? So going to the hard question of starting how to work on collaboration with teens. What are your recommendations?
Well, that's a great question. So here's the thing. There are things that your child has to do, And there are things that your child doesn't have to do. And really, school is their work. And generally, the challenge is for most parents of teens with ADHD, where do I step in and where do I kind of let them do their own thing? And if you have a history where your child actually needs some monitoring of school, then we are in a situation where they have very limited choice. Now, a lot of schools have online systems where you can check your child's grades and what assignments have been turned in, and that can be useful. But I think the main thing is that your child, teen, has privileges that you've given them. Usually they're phone privileges or computer privileges or technology or whatever. And they've come to expect those privileges essentially as their right. And I would pose that actually those privileges are privileges that you've given them. And so if your son wants to continue to have his gaming hour every day, then he needs to sit down and talk with you. Like, that's how it works. That's the trade-off. And, let him lead the discussion by what part of school would be tolerable for you to be involved in, or homework, and what part seems over the top. And you can speak about what your concerns are. So I think that you really have to start a conversation for collaboration about, what's the bottom line in terms of what you are willing to do and what you are willing to let them try to do without your supervision. At what point do you both agree that you need to step in? And if he says never, and you say, well, actually, when you're getting B's or below, I need to step in. If you maintain B's, then you can do it on your own. And how I'm going to notice that is I'm back each week to see how your grades are going. You can also say, look, you know what, you want to earn your computer time. That's great. In order to earn that time, we need to meet every week for 10 minutes each day, or once a week for 20 minutes to talk about school.
Okay. So, some of this is non-negotiable.
Right. So the thing is, I think it is non-negotiable in a way, because what you're saying is, look, your record at school shows me that you need support. Understand that you don't want me breathing over your neck, but my job is to help you develop and become the most effective, independent adult you can be. And so I actually am going to step in this way that we can agree on. So I think it's sort of a dance between some things are negotiable and some things aren't. But sitting down to talk to you really shouldn't be one of those things. Like, that has to be, no, you're going to have to talk to me. I'm your parent. You don't have to spend a long time talking to me, but you do need to talk to me.
Right. Well, interesting comment from Nancy. Said this sounds
it sounds. Yeah.
Go ahead. No. She said an interesting comment that this sounds like making a privilege into a punishment. So, in order to have your 15 minutes of game time, you need to talk to me, or if you don't, you won't have it. The balance between a privilege and a punishment.
No, it's an incentive.
Incentive. Okay.
Right. So it is, but it's an incentive. I want to talk to you. You want your game time. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk, and then you can have your game time. If you choose not to talk to me today, then there won't be game time today, and we'll do it again. And we'll go and tomorrow we'll do it. And tomorrow we'll do the same. You can do the same thing, or you can do it differently. Like, I'm trying to give options for different parents and different parenting styles. In general, what I think is that I notice a lot of parents are afraid to sort of say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to sit down and talk. I'm your mom, and I love you, and you don't have to talk to me for an hour, but we need to connect. It's my job. Okay.
Well, I think that's really helpful. Just, this is the way it is at some level, right? So then we have a number of questions that are really interesting, but they're micro, but I'll give you some of them just to see if this is helpful. How do I get my ADHD teen to use a planner? 3 or 4 people say that, my child refuses to use a planner, or he uses the planner but then doesn't follow it, or doesn't think he needs a planner because he says he can remember it, but then he doesn't remember it. what should a parent do in that question?
Right. This is also a huge issue, and I want to make sure that I didn't before I think that if a parent comes from love and the desire to connect, even if your child is outwardly reject, stick with that kind, compassionate. This is my goal for helping you become independent, and I think that's the same attitude with a planner. Now, I've met many kids with ADHD who hate making lists and hate using planners. And so what I've tried to work with them on is sitting down, if with a parent, then with someone at school, where they can lay out their week, because that is a skill that's very difficult for these kids, and it's not easy for them to keep track of their assignments. They'd rather just kind of, as they can, do them and then let them go. And so maybe the thing that I suggest is the type of planner that work, or the type of list. There's really no way to get around this. Peg Dawson and I have talked about this, which is like, there's really no way to get around making lists or using a planner other than making lists using a planner. So the question is, how can they do that in a way that would be acceptable for them? And so for some kids, what I've done is to try to introduce technology and in a way that might work for them. Like, how can we coordinate things like in your Google Calendar? Maybe we can just do for right now after school activities, try to have a family calendar so they can start to understand how that works without being fully responsible. For schoolwork, I think that really the issue is that if children, unfortunately, aren't taught early on how to do this and monitored, it's much harder when you get to adolescence, when it's most needed. So I encourage kids to really to try to either use the online portals that they have for classes. A lot of kids won't use a calendar because they say it's already there. I don't have to write it down. But in reality, most teachers write the assignment up on the board as well as on their classroom web, like portal or website or whatever. And so if the teen can take a picture of what's on the board and use that on a day-to-day basis, and if you can meet with your teen and have access to the syllabus or what's happening each week in the classroom, you can try to help them plan out the week by making a list, which isn't necessarily a planner, but it gets started in the idea of thinking about what I have to do today and what's next.
Okay.
Of course, working with them is also helpful. Sorry.
Working in terms of
working with them directly, like, do you put, well, I was going to say, how do you put something in your phone? Because they, I mean, I had a teenager come in here recently who didn't actually know how to use the calendar on their phone and didn't even know there were alerts, or, or was ignored the alerts because they didn't think they mattered. So really actually sitting with them and teaching them one-on-one rather than talking about the importance of a planner is more effective.
So actually,
I think expecting them to write things down by hand is just not going to happen. Right.
Okay.
Let's write this in your planner. Take out your phone. I mean, I can't tell you how many kids I work with in my office, and I say, okay, take out your phone. Let's write this down.
Right. So not the abstraction, but the literal. Let's write this down. Okay. There's a set of questions here that I find. Yeah. There's 3 questions here that I find interesting. They're different variations on a theme. One person says that my teen agreed to do his homework in increments, 20 minutes at a time, but we find that he's just sitting there dreaming and not doing homework. And then another one says, my son seems to have no endurance to finish it. He starts it and complains that he just can't do it. So these are kids who seem to, there's a third person here who just has a hard time actually getting things done. He starts, but he doesn't keep going. So Oh, and,
Yeah.
and another question here relates to this also is, what about when our sense of what it is to have gotten something done is different from his sense of getting something done? So these are all questions relating to
Yes.
the teen is tackling it, but not really, you know, sort of not really going all
Right.
in.
Right. Well, so one of the things that I recommend in my book is something called family work time. So that means that your child is at the kitchen table doing work and you are at the kitchen table doing work at the same time. So that way you are there kind of parallel, in a sense, parallel play. And you are able to kind of guide them back to when they get off track without in and intruding, on this is their perspective, coming in and intruding on what they're doing. You're all there together and you're working and they're working, and you can kind of keep an eye if they're like watching YouTube videos or, just veering off track and slowing down and spacing out. You can notice, hey, you know what? It seems like you're a little spacey. Why don't you take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and get started. And I'll try to, if you want help, I'm here. So that's one thing. The second thing is about what happens is this idea of sort of losing. So what happens is they start off and they're strong and then they kind of peter out.
Right.
And so in those instances, what I would do is sit down and say, let's talk for a minute. How long can you actually work while you're actually working, before you start to peter out? And let them tell you what it is, and then tell them what you notice, and then reset the work period, the homework period, for that amount of time before they peter out. Take a short break and then help them get started again. Because what they're showing you is actually what I was talking about in terms of procrastination, that the task is too big for their energy level and they need to regroup or stop thinking about that and do something else and then back to it.
Okay.
For kids who have a different idea of what finished is, I think that's really a challenge, because that sort of leads into the question of, well, what quality of work do I think you're turning in versus the quality of work you want to be turning in? And that is a really delicate dance. And I think that goes back to having a conversation in the beginning of the year about, what do we think you can actually do at school this year? And how can I help you come back to this agreed upon plan when you have, when you're resisting it or you're, throwing up your hand.
Okay. Interesting. There's some great ones here. I love these. One person says, how do you feel about teens listening to music while they're doing their homework? And another person says, this is great, my teen says she does her homework best while she's watching a video on her phone. So those are, that's terrific. You want my participation?
Right.
Here's my participation.
So, yes, go ahead, Susan. What's your participation?
Watching a video.
I think, no, there's no watching videos while you do homework. I kind of try, no, that doesn't work. So, but watching a video is a great incentive for when you finish your chunk of work time, or you finish your homework in total. That's the time to watch a video. Or kids who would watch like 2-minute YouTube things in their 5-minute work period breaks. In terms of listening to music, I've had a number of kids talk to me about how that really helps them. It sort of quiets the buzz in their brain. It takes the space of that buzz, and so then they can actually concentrate more. So I actually feel like if somebody wants to listen to music, that's fine. What isn't fine is searching through YouTube to find the music and then changing your music and then changing your music again. If you want to listen to music when you do your homework, that is great. Make a playlist and then stick with your playlist, and make a few playlists.
Right. Okay. So on to breaks. It's an obviously difficult one for many listeners. Right. They say, should we allow our child to choose the activity for break time? Because we know they'll choose technology, and then transition back to work is always really difficult. Should we present some options for break time? And similarly, how do I get my child to transition after a break back to schoolwork? So the whole
right,
question
of course.
of
well,
the,
I think you.
hello, Sharon, are
Yes,
you
I'm
there?
sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay,
You were
sorry.
speaking the whole question of. Yes,
Go ahead.
I'm here. I'm here. Yes. I'm sorry, the whole question. So this is a really good point. One of my ideas that I call easy on, easy off. So if your child cannot exit technology, no child has trouble getting on technology.
Yeah.
It's always the getting off that's the problem. So if your child can't transition from the incentive or their reward break technology, then that's not the right reward for them. Because the idea isn't that the break causes more stress. The idea is that the break actually is rejuvenating for them so that they can go back to doing their homework, right? So I think it's a sort of lesson learned kind of a thing. Well, I know you said on our list of incentives that, going to Instagram or Snapchat was what you wanted to do for your 5 minutes. But I noticed that when it's time to go back to work, you are arguing with me about that. So I don't think that's a great thing for us to do for a break anymore. What else could we come up with? Own it and name it when it's happening. In terms of this isn't the plan that we agreed, because if you keep coming back to the thing you agreed on, then the question is, why aren't you following the thing we agreed on? Then you're trying to develop some accountability for your child. And if they can't be accountable in a way, if they can't you're right, you know what, I am going on Snapchat because I hate my homework, then you can have a conversation about why you hate your homework. Or I'm going on Snapchat because I don't care about the student agreement. Okay, well, that's good to know, because we have things that you're earning through this agreement. And if you're not following the agreement, then you can't earn them. And that's where I go back to the whole thing about, sitting down, talk to me. Like, there are some things actually that have to be talked about. And so that's a have to. And doesn't have to be a reward or a punishment necessarily for talking to me. Ideally, you talk to me because we're in a family and this is how we live in our family. But for some kids, it's you may have to incentivize them to start it. And so I think that being able to use incentives that work, as well as they have to also matter to the kids. So it's really about brainstorming what that is and then following up. And if the incentives aren't working, then don't use them until your child is able to transition more smoothly. Okay.
Here's another one. What about doing homework while talking and texting with friends on social media? I suspect you're going to have the same reaction to that as
absolutely not.
While...
No, I mean,
right.
You're right. Exactly. I mean, my personal belief is that there is no room for texting, social media, and whatever when you're doing your homework. Now, instances where kids need to text other kids about an assignment. And if you're doing family work time, you're there to sort of see what that is, or you're there for them to say, hey, I need to text because I don't understand how to do this. Then they can ask you. But if they're in their room with their door closed, you have no idea what's going on. And for kids with ADHD, that doesn't help them stay on task. We want to have you there to sort of gently redirect them and support them. That's scaffolding I'm talking about. So you want to kind of guide them and model it for yourself. It won't work if you're doing in family work time, if you're on your Snapchat.
Right. Okay. Oh, we have only 3 minutes. Right.
Sure.
But, I thought I would just bring up before our time is out, time management. Specifically, a couple of people have raised the question of helping their child get up in the morning. And at what point do they let their child be late for school, because they're concerned, I think, legitimately about the fact that by the time high school's over, they'll be in college or wherever, they'll have to get up on their own. How do you teach your child time management in that regard? And when do you scaffold, quote, and when do you let go, I guess is the question.
Well, I think you scaffold when kids are in 9th and 10th grade, much more than you do when they're juniors or seniors, particularly seniors. I would assume by junior year, kids are getting up more readily. But in those first 2 years, you're going to need some help. And I really like setting up where, again, they earn something each time they follow through on a step. So if they can earn, extra technology time, because this is mostly what kids need, or maybe they're working towards buying earning points to buy a fancy pair of sneakers or something. Then each time that it is like a behavior chart. Each time when you get to school on time, point towards those sneakers. And when you have, 25 points, we'll get the sneakers or whatever. And then you start off with something else. Or every day, you get 45 minutes of guaranteed game time. And if you want more than that, you need to go to school on time. And the reason I say that is because I think that if you take away all technology from kids, it doesn't tend to work. It's better if you have a baseline that you give them and then you add on extra. So you keep the baseline low, which is unsatisfactory to them. And then they'll want to do the thing to get what they want. For mornings in particular, if the school has a procedure where if you're late a certain number of times, you have a detention or you have to stay after school or do community service, and your kid, let them have that experience a few times, they may change their minds about waking up for school. The one caveat is that I had a client who literally physically could not get up for school. And finally, after about a year, I convinced the parents to take him to a sleep expert, and it turned out that he had a sleep disorder. Wow. And they made, a number of tweaks in his sleep regimen. And so I want to just say to parents, if your child really cannot get up, it's not just, I don't want to get up. It's like, I physically can't wake up. Consider taking them to their pediatrician and maybe checking out if they have a sleep disorder, because, that actually is more problematic in college or when they're on their own than anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are so many good questions here. Sharon, I wish we had twice as much time. I'm sorry to say that time is up. But I'd like to invite all of you to Thursday, September 20 to listen to Sydney Goldrich on how to have a productive parent-teacher cooperation.